afternoon are going to be absolutely splendid. And we come along Wharfedale, which again is one of the prettiest valleys in Yorkshire. And the weather forecast is absolutely beautiful. You're going to get some stunning views this afternoon. Let's see where we are. We are travelling along the plain of York. Now the plain of York is very, very flat, as you can see. If you look both ways, you'll see that there are no hills for many, many miles. And this is because this plain is glacial. As we go down the high street here, you can see that it's more small shops. This is a small market town, remember. Market day is Wednesday, when they have open air stalls, all laid out. You can buy all sorts of bargains. There's shoes, clothing, bric-a-brac, rugs, antiques, bedding and linen. But here in the high street, you won't get any large, very large, Marks and Spencer's, C&A, British Home Stores. It's a small market town with small shops, and a lot of the shops are owned by local people. As we go down towards the bottom of the high street here, we're going into an area known as Bond End. Bond End is where the bonding or hiring fairs were held. Now the hiring fairs were for servants. Servants who wanted to be hired by somebody and bond it to them for a whole 12 months. And the farmers and their wives and the housekeepers of the big houses would come down here on Trinity Sunday and see who was up for hire, and then if they fancied them, thought they'd make a good servant, they bonded them to the family for a year. At the end of the year, if the family didn't like them or they hadn't given good service, they could get rid of them. The bond was broken. This isn't a village, it has no church. The definition between a hamlet and a village is a cluster of houses with or without a church. You can have the same number of houses, and if it hasn't got a church, it's a hamlet. If it has got a church, it's a village. The houses that you see here are all part of the Ripley village that was built by Sir Thomas Ingleby in the 1850s. We're going to travel now around the perimeter wall to Ripley. The moors are the high grounds, the very, very high, bare, barren tops. Nothing grows up there because the soil is poor and there's a lot of hard rock underneath. But the dales are the lovely, low, rich river valleys, where the land is fertile, the farming is good, and where the rivers flow. You'll find that most of the large Yorkshire Dales are called after the rivers that flow along that particular piece of land. For instance, we're going to be travelling soon along the valley of the River Nid, consequently we will be in Nidderdale. Later on this afternoon we'll travel along the valley of the River Wharfe, and so we'll be in Wharfedale. Calderdale, Airedale, they're all called after the rivers, and this applies to all the big dales except Wensleydale, which is called after a village. These are the Yorkshire Dales at their very, very best. Now you'll notice as we come up here that the farmers have turned slightly more to animal farming than they have to the crop farming. Mostly up here you've got sheep and cattle. Now the sheep are Swaledales. There are also some Suffolks and some Leicesters, which I'll be pointing out to you later on. But you can see an awful lot of cattle here, and down to the left there you have our Frisian cattle. We're coming now to Summerbridge, which is one of the first little villages on this side after Ripley. Typical of a Yorkshire village, built mostly of stone. Stone was very plentiful when the villages were built a couple of hundred years ago. It was cheap, it was plentiful, the quarries were full of it. Nowadays, stone is very hard to come by, it's very scarce, the quarries are all dug out, and consequently what stone there is very expensive. So if you want to build a little house here, you will be required to build it in stone to match the rest. You will find it is very expensive to do so. God, it's pretty, isn't it, round here? Because we're now going to climb Greenhow Hill, and once at the top of that, we'll be going along down towards Wharfedale. We go through Burnsall village and along the valley of the River Wharfe to the ruins of Bolton Priory. Now, it's such a lovely day that we're going to make time to give you 2 photograph stops. One above Burnsall village, which is beautiful, and one above the ruins of Bolton Priory, so you'll get the Abbey ruins as well, provided there isn't too much traffic at the Priory. That's the only thing. There is only one little place where we can stop, but we'll try and get you in there. Otherwise, we'll just slow down to 30 miles an hour, and those of you who want to jump out can do, okay? This river is the River Wharfe. We're now away from Nidderdale itself and into Wharfedale, and we're going down through the village of Burnsall. So we're going to travel now along beautiful Wharfedale. We're coming onto land owned by the Duke of Devonshire, whose main stately home is Chatsworth House in Derbyshire. But he also owns the lands up here around Bolton Abbey, owns Bolton Priory, and of course the lodge house there, where he sometimes comes to stay when he comes for the shooting season. Now you can see that some farmers have shaved their fields very, very close. This is because in May the farmers make silage. Now silage is the cut grass. They leave it to grow very long and then they cut it when they're sure it's got its sap and its juices in it. They like the grass to be slightly wet on the outside, but they like to make sure it's grown enough to have its own juices in it. If they cut it too early and there's no sap in it, the silage is then too dry. As we go around the corner on the left-hand side, you'll be able to see the ruins of the old Bardon Tower. The Bardon Tower here was built originally to house the keeper of the King's Forest, because all this area was very thickly forested. It was part of the Great Forest of Knaresborough. The keeper of the King's Forest, it was his job to look after the King's wild animals here and make sure that nobody did any poaching or shooting or hunting other than the King or part of the King's corsage himself. This forest was full of wild boar, wild stag, deers, rabbits, foxes, badgers, you name it, these animals were in here. And if the peasants were caught poaching, they were fined. Now obviously they couldn't pay the fines, they were only poaching for food because they were so poor. And eventually, if they couldn't pay the fines, they would have their hand chopped off so that they couldn't set another trap. It's very gory, wasn't it, in the Middle Ages here? Now we're coming towards the ruins of Bolton Priory. Bolton Priory was an Augustinian sect, yes, nearly said Benedictine there. The monks here followed the teachings of St. Augustine. They were quite a strict sect, although not as strict as the Cistercians. The Cistercians had periods of silence every day when they weren't allowed to speak for any reason at all, be it to ask for bread or water or anything. The Augustinian monks were a little less severe than that, but they were very clever men down here. They were good businessmen. They had a few sheep to start with because they started building their abbey here in 1130, and they were given a few sheep at the same time, and they increased their herd from year to year. Once the flock of sheep was big enough, they sold part of it off and bought land, and so it went on. They also made money by selling the mead and beer and wine that they made to passing travellers. They were really part of the first innkeepers in this area. At this time of year, the sheep are sheared. In the first week in June, the farmer will shear his sheep because it's deemed at that point that the weather will not get freezing cold again until winter, and so they can shear the sheep and know that the weather isn't cold enough to give them a chill, because if it gets very cold and the sheep's just been sheared, it will catch a chill and get a sort of pneumonia and sometimes even die. So when they've sheared the sheep, the farmers get together in the region and they say, right, what colour do you want to be this year? And Farmer Jones might say, I'll be red, and Farmer Brown might say, well, I'll be green, and Farmer Giles might say, well, I'll be blue. And so they all stick to that colour for this season. And when they've sheared their sheep, on the back of the sheep's neck or on its shoulder, they dab it with their colour. A little dye dabbed. And that's the mark you see on the neck or the shoulder. That's an identification mark, so that if one sheep strays into another sheep's field, the farmers know which sheep belong to whom. Okay. In October, the farmer decides he's going to put the ram in the field with the ewes. So he gets his prize ram, who has been resting all year. Then he puts the ram in the field. 1 ram to 50 ewes. This is why the ram has been resting all summer. He's got to be fit. Unfortunately, not all ewes, if they're clever, get pregnant first time. So 18 days later, 18 days is a sheep cycle, the farmer puts the ram into the field again. He's not quite so chipper this time, he staggers a bit, you know, because he's tired. And the ram goes into the field and he knows by a sense of hormones that's given off from the ewe which are pregnant and which aren't, and he only goes to the ones which aren't already pregnant. And maybe one or two he fancies, I don't know. Now, pregnancy in a sheep is 5 months. So if the ram goes in at the beginning of October, you're going to get your lambs sometime towards the end of February. So from here, we go along the A59 to Harrogate, and then we go through Harrogate itself, showing you the spa centre and the beautiful floral beds in the town.
We're driving through the Yorkshire Dales with the Hawaii Geographic Society. We're touring the British Isles. We started in London, we headed south to Cornwall, we visited Bath and Chester. Now we're in Yorkshire, and coming up next in the program we'll be heading north to Edinburgh, Scotland. You're watching World Traveller, presented by the Hawaii Geographic Society.
They have their recreation here, the football team practices, people walk on it, exercise their dogs and horses. It's a wonderful asset to the town. Great. All right, ladies? Good.
The Yorkshire Dales provide some of the most beautiful scenery in all of Great Britain. It's yet another reason for spending a couple of days when you visit the city of York. York Minster towers above everything in York. We've enjoyed very much our stay here, but now it's time to go.